What's been the worst moment in your career so far?
I think that the worst moment in my career probably happened early on. It might not necessarily have been actually the worst thing that ever happened, but definitely felt that way. So my career is split into two. Before I started Ruby, I used to be a geopolitical analyst focusing on East African conflict and Somali piracy. And I remember in the early days of my career, I was so very challenged by some things that I do. So, I was expected to, respond very quickly and report on, very, very complex, in-depth topics. Oftentimes, to people who have had, 40 plus more years of experience in these areas. And I remember feeling, I think it was kind of the beginning of imposter syndrome. I remember just thinking, oh gosh, not again. I'd be rolled out to do another one. And I was very conscientious and, did the job, well enough. But I just remember thinking, oh, just that this was just such a difficult kind of challenge to overcome. But actually off the back of that, I learned something, quite important. And that was that it was so important to me to truly grasp and understand and own whatever it was that I was working on. And so I made the jump to actually move away from my job, which was in London, very much behind a computer, analyzing news reports, etc., to moving to Kenya, where I was working on the ground, really diving into some of these topics, which was, a great experience, and kind of came off the back of that, very, very, insecure, young, imposter syndrome kind of moment in my career. How about you?
I think running a business for 20 years now, various businesses over that time, you just end up with so much stuff coming your way. I actually struggle to pick the worst moment in some ways. We've been sued, we've been defrauded, we've had check fraud, we've been robbed twice, we've been flooded. When our comms room wiped out all our communications. I think I've done 3 at least rounds of significant redundancies across multiple recessions. And so when I looked at it, I thought, oh my goodness, there's actually quite a lot of stuff in here. But I think the worst moment probably for me is, again, relatively early on in my career. We had, for some reason, taken a contract and done a contract in an agreement with actually one of the very few people that actually ever been convicted by the Serious Fraud Office of an actual crime. I don't know why we didn't do more due diligence on this particular customer, but we entered into a contract with them, and very quickly the relationship began to unravel, and we said, actually, we thought it would be best to bring, to discuss this and bring it to an end. He got very, very angry, and I think it was very physically intimidating as well as very aggressive, and I just found the whole thing incredibly stressful, to have this sort of both like almost physical and aggression, and sort of real aggression on email, and in conversations with us around this potentially just a business contract. And I just remember feeling, how difficult it was. And I ended up sort of creating this mental image of a barking dog. I'm quite afraid of dogs as well. So I had to sort of characterize him as this dog that was on a leash, on a chain. And the only way I could get myself control over it was to think, well, actually, it is on a chain. It can only hurt me if I choose to go at that point. And I sort of bring that back into my control of when I choose to engage with something that was very frightening and intimidating to me at the time. And so I guess I learned from it retrospectively, that you can bring control to situations that are, very frightening or very difficult, if you can mentally create a space to put them in safely, and then you at least have some choice as to how you engage with it, even if it's deeply unpleasant. But I think across, there's definitely been lots of worst moments when your heart just sort of sinks and it's another black day and something terrible has gone up beyond your control. But I think at least it taught me early on in my career how to manage that, and manage the kind of the emotions that go with it. Although it was quite a very, very, very painful lesson at the time. I still look back on it, it gives me palpitations. So
I bet. And it's so hard, especially when something moves from the kind of professional sphere, which is obviously got its own sort of rules that you can manage, you can manage it, into personal, when someone's being, personally aggressive. That's just a whole different kind of ball game to have to deal with. But I guess, listening to that long list of, problems that you've had to deal with. And, I sort of feel quite similar. I guess one thing that you build is this degree of resilience.
Yeah.
I remember early days, when these things would happen, and it would just, I wouldn't sleep a wink, all night, you weren't able to pay bills or something, and it would just be kind of the end of the world. And over time, the more it happens, you just kind of build this resilience. And now I look at some things, that happen, particularly, everything that we're having to deal with now with coronavirus, we're dealing with our staff, dealing with, potentially furloughing staff, working on new strategies. It's incredibly challenging, but I do think if you've had a bit of a track record, you're sort of perhaps better positioned to manage it.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, that sleeplessness really resonates with me. It's actually one of the reasons why I started Fluidly, which was sort of like more than 2/3 of business owners say they worry so much about their finances, they're paying bills, worrying about whether they can make payroll. That's kind of how I got into it. So yeah, in the end, I took control and started a business around it. But yeah, it is a frightening, difficult time, those moments, and they are the sort of it's a dead of the night, isn't it? When you wake up early and your mind
Always
is
the 3 a.m.
Yeah.
I had a question. So there are only 6 women at the helm of FTSE 100 companies. Do you think, very controversially, that women aren't as ambitious as men?
Absolutely not. I think that is total rubbish. And I get by your your question putting as well, that you kind of think that way as well potentially, but I don't know. But
Yeah.
I think that whole sense of one of the things I hate most is that the ambition is a bad word when it comes to women. Sometimes it's seen, it's characterized, she's very ambitious, terribly competitive. And what is wrong with that? I think women want to win, and that is absolutely fine. And I think what is different, though, potentially, is that women define winning differently. It doesn't always have to have a status or money or power attached to it. But if it does, good on you. Go ahead and own that. But I do think this sort of negativity that goes around ambition, or negativity that goes around competitiveness when it comes to women, is just a terrible narrative. And I think absolutely women should be competitive, they should be ambitious, and they do want to win. And I think some of the challenge actually is that perhaps women's ambition is sometimes more masked or more layered, or projected in different ways, because there's a societal pressure sometimes not to behave in a way that's overtly ambitious or overtly competitive. But I don't think that is anything to do with the lack of desire for that. It's more about how it's portrayed.
I agree with you. Absolutely, I agree with you. And I think that ambition is a fantastic attribute. And I think if we look to history, we've seen that despite, all of the obstacles in our collective way, women continue to aspire, continue to fight, to have the opportunities that men do. And if that's not ambition, then what is it? To continue and to not give up that fight. Even now, it's about equal pay, it's about increasing the ratio, the number of women on boards. It's a slow battle, and we see slow progress, but it's definitely not an easy one. And I think, in fact, what it shows is that women are incredibly ambitious as a collective.
Yeah, I mean, I once had a quote that said, especially in Britain, as Brits, often we apologize a lot, and I think women sometimes apologize a lot. And so I'm saying, no one really apologizes their way to success. I'm terribly sorry. Would you mind if I, and it's sort of like, how do you get over that? But then maybe it comes to perception as well, and there was a quote that Dame Inga Beale had said, that that men are judged by what they can do, and women are still judged first by the way they look. And do you think there's any truth in that?
I think there is. And, I was reading about this, and apparently, there are studies that say that even at the age of 7, young girls are taught that their looks are more important than their character. So I think that it's definitely something, that's been ingrained for a very long time, and that's hugely challenging. I sort of see this in 2 ways. I see, if I sort of think about it optimistically, I think that yes, we are judged, but at the same time, as soon as we open our mouth, all of that judgment can move to the wayside. And I remember I had, in my first career, there were not very many women at all around. In fact, it was, quite military, quite masculine, which is obviously like not me at all. And one of the few sort of senior women, she really inspired me, and I would just observe her because she was so herself. She would wear whatever she wanted to wear. I mean, she wore sunglasses inside. She was a character and a half, and very easy to judge and to have preconceived ideas. But as soon as she opened her mouth, she would knock anyone else out of the room with her knowledge, her analysis, her everything. And what she taught me was that it doesn't matter what I look like or anything like that. What's important is what I say. So I think that there's positivity on that angle, but I also think that unfortunately in the vast case, in the vast incidents, actually a lot of women don't have that voice. So we're not even given that opportunity to have people forget about looks, if whatever it might be, if we're older, if we're overweight, if we're in some way not acceptable. And again, talking about that point of representation, we just don't have, women are just not represented in the workspace. Particularly in the tech industry, which I'm now in, only 25% of boards even have a single woman on them. So I think that if you look at the kind of macro picture, that we are judged on how we look, and unfortunately not all of us have that voice to change perception. What about you? How do you feel about that?
I think what you were saying about the 7-year-old girls really resonated with me. My daughter's 10, and I would say many people on first meeting her would say, "Oh, I love your dress," or "Your hair looks so pretty today," or they'll effectively comment on her appearance. And I often think, it's very nice to have a compliment, of course, and she's happy. But to have that constantly being the first thing that is told to you by a stranger, from a very young age, I think it's difficult, and it does set a tone. I'd like to hope, and the thing I talked to her about, and children more generally, is first impressions, and that is. But for me, that's more about smiling. It's warmth, eye contact. I think those are the things that actually make a good first impression, and I think they apply equally to men or women. And people do judge at that point, and in some cases, I think that's okay. In that the quote, that quote, "Men are judged by what they can do." Well, actually, capability is only one thing. I think it's not just about what you can do personally. It's how do you take people with you? How do you build a narrative around that? How do you bring more people along on that journey? So I do think that kind of wider narrative communication piece is so much more important in many ways, or as important as actually getting the job done. And I do think that actually, being judged by things that are more than purely getting from A to B, it's not just the what, but it's also the how. And I think that is, something that applies to men and women equally.
What would you say is your one practical tip or leadership lesson that you can share with me and other ambitious women?
And it's a bit trite, I suppose, in some ways, but it's kind of back to being yourself. And I think that, I'm always talking to my team, and I'm saying that heart as well as head. People get very rational, and they should be, and it's very data driven, and we have a very focus on data, logic, rationality, and that is absolutely essential to anything in business. But it doesn't always move people in the same way. And I think, the best leaders combine their heart with their head. And, people, I always say, they buy with their heart and they justify after with their head. And so it's like, how do you make sure that you're bringing both parts of that message? And I think it's easy for women to focus so much on getting the job done and getting it effectively done, and focus on just getting the task completion. But it's not just about the task itself, it's the narrative about that task. It's bringing other people around it with you, making people want to go there. And so I'm always saying more heart, not just tell me what it is, but tell me why I should do it. What's in it for me? How am I going to make it memorable, sticky, or where's the sparkle? Like, help me land it as well, and help me make it something that's going to stick. And so I think for me, a kind of good tip would be for women to think beyond the task and into, away from the head, away from the data, you've got to do that flawlessly, of course, but then how do you layer emotion and empathy onto it? And my favorite leader out there at the moment has got to be Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand Prime Minister, who is just having, a combination of her empathy and strength, I think, has really marked her out as a world-class leader. Not always against a difficult field, but I think she's been fantastic. So I think finding role models that you can aspire to and then inspire you, I find hugely helpful. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you there. And I think that it's such an amazing learning to realize that you can bring your whole self, your whole personality to the workplace. It makes it feel a lot more natural. And I think that it's really important for other women, particularly, from my position, other women that I work with, to realize that, they don't need to wear a mask. They can come and show them their full selves. And I think that that's one of the things that I struggled with in my early career, when I kind of felt like I couldn't really do that. And that's why I sort of moved away. And I think my advice would be based around the fact that, leadership is not easy, and it's very difficult sometimes to know what the right answer is. And sometimes you are not going to know the right answer. Sometimes, particularly now in this point in time, we don't have any information. We've got, let's say we've got to make a decision based on, quote unquote, 20% of the information. And that's really challenging. And so you have to use your best judgment. So that can be, as the sort of sole leader, as it were, it can be, feel like an isolating experience. And so what I always say, and something that's helped me a lot, has been to build up a network of people around me, not just of mentors, but of peers in similar situations, where I can run these ideas by them. So it does feel like I have that support network. And that's really helped me, over the years. And it doesn't need to be people who are more experienced or older or whatever it might be. I think that it's really helpful to have people, from all areas of your professional life support in that way.